Erev Tov, everyone. Hope everybody had a good day. And we are beginning a new book, Sefer Vayikra. Last year, we learned it with Rabbi Shai-Held. This year, we did Rabbi Shai-Held on Shemot. Rabbi Shai-Held, by the way, has a new podcast um, called Answers Withheld. And it's already very popular. So just a recommendation. And we are returning to Nechama Leibowitz to get a glimpse of how she helps us navigate what I think is often the hardest book to really delve into and relate to of the five books of the Torah. So hopefully we will get some insight from her. Going to share my screen and let us begin. As we delve in, we'll recognize, for those who learned together her teachings last year, some of her characteristic approaches, much more explicit citation of texts, the classical medieval commentaries, and some of the modern commentaries, not quite as broad a lexicon as Rav Shai in terms of the contemporary commentaries, but still a nice breadth and more direct quotes, a little less of the bringing it up to the current moment, but there are sometimes spiritual applications and a little less structured. Rav Shai often, in his opening paragraph, laid out his thesis, then took us through the text or theme, question, a few stages of analysis, and then application to today. Here we don't necessarily have a topic sentence, and sometimes she'll work through a few kind of preliminary points before moving to the central point, and a little bit more lets the texts speak for themselves. Texts and the commentaries speak for themselves. Here, the central point we will look at is the question of what lirtzono means when it comes to one of the first psukim in our book, and it's a term and concept which is sort of shot all the way through the sacrificial service, which is so central to the book of Vayikra. So it's a good word to zero in on as we're starting off this book. So she translates that he may be accepted. It's an awkward translation or awkward kind of title, but we'll understand it better as we go through the essay. So starting off with chapter 1, verse 3. Im ola korbano min habakar, zachar tamim yakrivenu, el petach ohel moed yakrivoto, lirtzono lifnei Adonai. If his offering be a burnt sacrifice, we can just remind you the first two psukim of the book. God calls out to Moshe and speaks to Moshe from the tent of meeting, says, if a person will offer from amongst you a korban from the various animals, he should offer it, basically. So we have just the introduction to the notion of the sacrificial service. And now we meet the first type of offering, the olah, the burnt offering. So we're told here, if the offering is a burnt offering, a korban olah, then it should be from a male, from of the herd that should be without blemish, should be offered at the entrance to the Ohel Moed, to the Mishkan. That, and she translates here, that he may be accepted, purposely a little bit vague and ambiguous, before the Lord. You can see that there are 5 Hebrew lines here and 5 English lines. She's divided up as she begins. This verse comprises 5 parts. The first introduces the subject, that we're talking about a korban olah, and the rest deals with the requirements, right? Male without blemish, location, door of the tent of meeting, goal in some sense, that it be accepted, and kind of relational counterpart, God. In this and the next 2 verses, the person who offers the sacrifice is the active part. Thus Rashi in Pasuk Hey, the third of this 3 verses, 3 through 5, comments, and he shall kill, and the priests Aaron's sons shall bring. Rashi says, from the receiving of the blood in a vessel onward, the service could only be executed by the priests. However, the shchita, the killing, could be performed by a layman. Beno Jacob points out that the derivatives of karev, the verb hikriv, offered, and the noun korban appear 7 times in verses 2 and 3, and considers it, that's Beno Jacob, considers it analogous to the psalmist's 7 times a day I praise you, Sheba Bayom Hilalticha, in that very, very longest of Psalms, Psalm 119, which has the alphabetical acrostic, 8 verses, beginning with each of the 22 letters of the alphabet. That takes you to 176 verses. Here we're in the second to last, the Shin section, Sheva Bayom Hilalticha. And to Jacob's bowing 7 times as he approaches Esav. So in these verses 2 and 3, we have 7 appearances of the root Kuf Resh Bet, to sort of indicate that in the drawing near or in the relational connection to God, there is this sort of 7-fold aspect. However, the verb hikriv has several different connotations in these verses. In the first instance, it signifies consecrating the object to be sacrificed. So in verse 2, we don't have that in front of us. Adam ki yakriv mikem, if a person amongst you would, designate an object to be sacrificed. Thus, from the moment a person decides to make an offering, the object is treated as a sacrifice to the Lord. Again, as often with Nechama Leibowitz, she may be making significant points and she doesn't tell us. She just sort of, in this expository style, takes us through a series of declarations. But she's noting something really interesting here, which is, when does something become a korban? When does it achieve its status or state of being an offering? It doesn't wait until it's burnt on the altar, doesn't wait until it's slaughtered. When a person says, this animal I'm planning to offer, it already, the verb for that is associated with korban is already being used. So consecrating the object already gives it that status of this drawing near relational object. Right? From the moment a person decides to make an offering, maybe even just in their mind, they make that determination. The object is treated as a sacrifice to the Lord. I think she's not speaking in a very hyper-legalistic sense here about, becoming hekdesh and not being able to be trespassed necessarily, but she's talking spiritually, it already achieves that status. In the second, it denotes bringing to the door of the tent of meeting. Here she's talking about El Petach Ohel Moed Yakrivoto, right? Offer it at the door of the tent of meeting, but it's not yet been slaughtered or put onto the altar, but already it has that sense of being a sacrifice, even just in the bringing, in the designating, in the bringing. In chapter 17, verse 4, the venue of the sacrifice is more fully defined, not just the door of the tent of meeting, but there it says, to the door of the tent of meeting, to offer a sacrifice to the Lord before the dwelling place of the Lord. And the footnote here says, the Baal HaTurim explains it thus: an Israelite may not say to a Kohen, take the animal I consecrated in my home and offer it up as a sacrifice, but he himself, the owner, must go to the trouble of taking it to the temple, for this is the respectful way to treat holy things, right? So on the one hand, the sacrifice already has its status of being a sacrifice from the time that the person intends it. But then it doesn't enter the precinct of the Kohen. It's still the responsibility of the person who's bringing it to engage in the process of taking it all the way to the Kohen. Following, so you can see she's making a series of points introducing us to the notion of the korban and its various kind of meanings and definitions before she gets to what her focal point is going to be, which is the notion of liratzono, of favor. Following is Beno Jacob's incisive comment. He is a favorite of Nechama's, and it's really only through her that I ever see his commentary. So he writes, wherever man may be, he stands before the Lord. However, when he brings an offering to the Lord, he does so before the door of the tent of meeting, the place about which God said that I may dwell among them, right? Vasuli mikdash v'shachanti b'docha, make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them, where God commanded us to erect a dwelling place for the Shekhinah in the midst of God's people, and where the Holy Ark and the tablets are found. Okay, so we are in relationship with God wherever we are, but when it comes to a korban, to bringing an offering, there's a specific place, which is we take it to God's house. We're bringing a gift of an object of connection between us and God. It's done at God's house, even though we can connect with God wherever we are. It is from there that God's word reaches Israel through Moses. Here, every detail reminds man of his God, and nothing diverts his thoughts from God, right? The whole precinct of the temple is a place which is designed and set up to keep us, and the laws that prescribe our behavior there are meant to keep us focused on God's presence and God's house the whole time we're there. Owing to his constitution, man needs such assistance, i.e., a localized, visible sanctuary, right? It's helpful to us to be able to have that place where we can go and have a more focused experience of our relationship with God. Okay, so this is really her kind of part A, and not neatly organized for us per se, but helping us appreciate the appearances of karev, the idea that that's the term that guides us through, that its sevenfold appearance mirrors these other instances of sevenfold praise and sevenfold deferential service, and that it incorporates our intention to connect to God, our journey with the object to the place where God chooses to dwell, and our connection with God that happens there. That's part one. As to the meaning of lirtzono, that he may be accepted, our commentators offer different views, right? Let's go back there for a moment just so we can sort of anticipate, right? So if a person is offering a burnt offering, then it should come from a male from the herd, unblemished, and should be offered at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Lirtzono, essentially even more broadly, with will or towards favor in front of God. So the possessive pronoun, I guess, or maybe it's a direct object pronoun, is the part of the ambiguous question. What's the whose ratzon, whose favor is spoken about here? And that's what she's going to take us through. So our commentators offer different views. Onkelos, translated from the Aramaic here, says, he shall offer it for his acceptance before the Lord. Rashbam, if he will offer a male without blemish and bring it to the door of the tent of meeting, then it will be acceptable. But as to a sick or blemished animal, the prophet says, will he be pleased with you or will he show you favor? So she doesn't get into this at length, but I think we can note, I think, a potential slight difference between Onkelos and the Rashbam. The Rashbam says he shall offer it for his acceptance, which I almost imagine as in the hopes of being accepted, right? He offers it, and the goal is acceptance. Rashbam seems more kind of declarative. If you follow the instructions above and you offer the correct kind of offering and you bring it to the place it's supposed to come, that achieves acceptance, right? For Onkelos, it sounds almost like there are other factors that might be at play that will determine whether it will be accepted or not. It's not simply enough to bring the correct animal, but bring it for acceptance. But whether it's accepted or not will depend on some other factors. The heartfelt nature, who knows, some other realm of intention. I think that's possibly included in Onkelos. This is the goal, but it's not the guaranteed outcome. Rashbam seems to be focused more on lirtzono as the guaranteed outcome. If you do what it says above, you offer the offering in the way that it's supposed to be offered, it is finds favor or it will be acceptable. Now, Ibn Ezra takes us into a different dimension of litzono. Ibn Ezra says that he may offer it willingly and not under duress. Now, it's not that it be acceptable to God, but it's that it be offered willingly by the offerer, right? So, sorry to keep zipping back and forth here. If the offering be a burnt sacrifice, let him offer a male without blemish. He shall offer it at the door of the tent of meeting, and it should be willingly offered in the presence of God. Abravanel, it is to emphasize that the first sacrifice the Torah mentions is a burnt offering, which is not an obligatory, but a voluntary offering. And it should be brought of your own totally free will and choice. Again, same broad point there, that, even though there are different kinds of offerings, the very first one we introduce is one that is volitional, to highlight the dimension of the service of korbanot, which is really about expressing our own free will. And Malbim, similarly, willingly and intentionally, not as an obligation, which is inconsistent with free choice. Now she's going to delve a little bit more into this Malbim. There are two meanings to lirtzono, which Malbim explains as follows. The Hebrew ratzon has two connotations: forgiveness, willingness to forgive sins, as in ki nirtza avona, her iniquity is pardoned, the will to forgive has been shown toward it, or as tirtzeh haaretz et shabtoteha, then the land will make up for her Sabbaths, i.e., be forgiven for the unobserved sabbatical years, right? There's an idea that, for all the land punishes us for all the years that we didn't observe the Shemitah, but then it will be, willfully forgiven. So that's option one, that ratzon means the will to forgive has been shown, and therefore forgiveness has been offered or given. And two, desire for something, a synonym of chayfetz, desire as opposed to willingness to forgive. However, the difference between ratzon and chayfetz is that the former is a rational and the latter an emotional choice. Ratzon is the volition of the mind, chayfetz the instinctive inclination, a craving and a hankering. A person may will something without desiring it, right? You could have the rational sense that something is good for you, but you don't have an inner urge for it, or vice versa. You could have an urge for something which is, in your mind, is not good for you. Thus, ki chafetz bevat Yaakov, because he had delight in Jacob's daughter, which is in the story of the rape of Dinah by Shechem. Shechem no doubt desired Dinah with his heart, but not with his reason. For judging rationally, a man does not choose evil. If Shechem had really thought about it, he wouldn't have taken Dinah against her will, but his urges got the better of him. We therefore do not find throughout Scripture ratzon in connection with a wicked intention. This is denoted by chayfetz, as uveshikutzehem nafsham chafetza, their soul delights in their abominations. For craving is stronger than the rational will. So when we have people expressing desire, and it's a desire to do something sinful, that's chayfetz. If they're doing something, rightful, then it would be expressed with ratzon. So also, v'im lo yachpotz ha'ish lakachat et yevimto, if the man like not to take his brother's wife. Indeed, this is in the laws of yibum, of levirate marriage. Indeed, rationally, man intends to comply with God's commandments. So right here, it's saying it's desire driving the urge not to marry his deceased brother's wife, because if he were operating based on ratzon, of course he would want to perform the levirate marriage. But here, the brother's dislike of his sister-in-law induced reason to surrender to instinct. Most commentators disagree with this interpretation. Among them, Naphtali Hertz Wiesel. So here the interpretation being that ratzon means, expressing the rational desire to do the right thing. Most commentators disagree with this interpretation, amongst them Naftali Hertz Weisel in his commentary, the Bior, in the same place. Liotsono. The offering must be brought in a spirit that renders it acceptable before the Lord, to gain God's approval. This is the meaning of ratzon in the context of the sacrifices, as in lirtzonchem tizbachu hen. I have to check that. I think it should be tizbachuhu, lirtzonchem tizbachuhu. I think that final nun is too long and should be above. You shall offer it that it may be favorably accepted. Or elsewhere in Vayikra, kol asher bo mum lo takrivu, ki lo leratzon yihye lachem. Whatever has a blemish, you should not offer that, for it shall not be acceptable for you. Thus also Onkelos, lera'ava le, for his acceptance before the Lord. Furthermore, ratzon in the Bible does not signify free will. It is the antonym of anger and wrath, as noted before. Okay, so again, here she's pointing out that the Malbim, and really it seems Ibn Ezra and Abravanel, she's saying, are all generally disagreed with, that here ratzon doesn't mean with free will, but it means in order to achieve God's favor. But we certainly have three good people to go on the side of in the expression of free will. Weisel is borne out by Rashi on Uritzon Shochni Saneh in the Brachot to Yosef in Vizot HaBracha, Deuteronomy 33. Rashi says, Uritzon Shochni Saneh, the goodwill of the one that dwelt in the bush. Ratzon means satisfaction and conciliation throughout the Bible. Okay, so here Rashi is giving us a global comment, not just interpreting it locally, but telling us this is its meaning in general. God's, or could be someone besides God, but it's about the showing favorable acceptance of something. Ibn Ezra, in contrast to Onkelos and most commentators, appears to draw on the text reading Litzono, the offerer's goodwill, instead of Liratzon lo, which would relate to God, right? So she's pointing out Ibn Ezra alongside the Malbim, taking this more contrary approach, opposite to Rashi and Onkelos and others. This is also Ibn Ezra's interpretation of Liotzon tizbachuhu, right? So given that Naftali Hertz Weisel and others adduce this as a proof that ratzon means favorably accepted. So once Ibn Ezra is now saying that leratzon means with free will as opposed to favorable acceptance, what does he do with another example of ratzon? He also interprets it the same, consistent with his own approach. Leratzonchem tizbachu, you should offer it of your own free will and not as an obligation. This differs from most commentators, including Onkelos, who translates l'ra'ava lachon, that it may affect favor for you, and Rashi's lachem l'ratzon almenat nachat ruach sheyehei. I don't know if that's a little bit out of order. To give God satisfaction, that it may affect favor for you. Okay, so just pausing here for a moment to sort of summarize where we are at this point. Most of the way, a little more than halfway, on this question of what ratzon means in the sacrificial service. Are we talking about offering offerings from our own free will? Is that the central point, that we should willingly come forward to offer these offerings, either specifically the voluntary ones or maybe even the obligatory ones? Yes, we're commanded, but the emphasis is that it's about exercising our free will to bring these gifts, these offerings, or is the focus that they find favor in God's eyes? Of course, they're not mutually exclusive. Maybe they're even related in some way. But where does one place the emphasis? For just at a technical level, how does one translate this important opening verse, chapter 1, verse 3? But more than that, where is the focus? Is the focus on the intention, frame of mind of the giver, or the desired outcome vis-a-vis God's response? Okay, let's go on a little further. Okay, so having said that Rashi's in, camp God's favor as opposed to camp, the free will of the giver, she continues. However, Rashi quotes also the Midrash, Yakrivoto, he shall offer it. That is to say, he is forced to do so. This is an obligation. Even against his will? No, for the Torah states lirtzono, okay, which makes it sound like ratzon means with your own free will, as opposed to what we said the focus for Rashi is, which is for God's favor. So how then? Okay, if you're forced to do so, but you also are able to express your own free will, how do those things go together? He is pressed until he declares, "It is my will." This is, and now even though she the formatting here should make this a new paragraph. I think we're returning now to Nechama's own voice. This is the end of the Midrash that Rashi quotes. And so now it's back to her explanation. Rashi means that a person who retracts his vow to offer a sacrifice is pressed to reassert his vow. If you say you express intention to offer a sacrifice, you make a commitment, then you back out, you're supposed to, we try to coerce you to go ahead and offer the offering you originally expressed intention to offer. This is not derived from lirtzono, but from the redundant oto, yakriv oto, he shall offer it. We don't necessarily need that oto. However, what is the worth of a forced offering? Upon closer consideration, we shall find in this very paradox a profound lesson, as elaborated by Maimonides' classic comment in his code, The Laws of Divorce. The term forced, right? This has to do with the fact that a get has to be given of the husband's own free will. If it is coerced, it is not a valid get. So we need to understand exactly what it means to be forced or not be forced. The term forced, the Rambam explains, applies solely to one compelled to do something he is not obliged to do by the Torah. For example, to a person beaten until he sells or gives away something. However, a person who, driven by his evil instinct, spurns a mitzvah or commits a sin, wherefore he is smitten until he fulfills his obligation or refrains from transgressing, such treatment does not denote force. Rather, it was he who had forced himself to follow his evil counsel. Following Maimonides, the author of Torah Tamima comments, deep in his heart, every Jew strives to fulfill the laws of the Torah. However, his evil instinct prevails. His greed prevents him from honoring his vow and offering his sacrifice. He is therefore compelled to reach a deeper level and reveal the true desire of his innermost soul. So here we're noting that when it comes to the question of, one's free will, it's sort of a complicated topic in the Torah. Because we want people to act of their own free will, but we also believe that their innermost desire is to follow the Torah. And so, there are circumstances in which we, there is an idea here of, utilizing force to help someone realize what their free will or deepest desire actually is. This is an important point, she concludes. Pressed in many ways, a youngster often seems to be acting under duress, when in fact he is merely aided to follow the dictates of his heart. When stubbornness or embarrassment, fear of his friends' sneers or indolence stand in his way, the pressure merely helps to bring out the youngster's true desire. So I'm sure, psychologists or otherwise amongst us, can reflect on this sort of question. How do we discern true free will? And where do we intervene to try to help bring that out? And what are the sort of competing factors? And again, in typical Nechama fashion, she doesn't sort of tie it all up. She doesn't really answer how to understand the two dimensions of Rashi. On the one hand, talking about ratzon, meaning finding God's favor. On the other hand, the sense of ratzon as free will. Maybe what she's attempting to elicit is the idea that the deepest we believe that the deepest desire is to do in accordance with what God finds favorable. And so maybe somehow hinting to almost collapsing the distinction between them, that the emphasis on a person bringing of their own free will actually is sort of the same as the emphasis on finding favor with God, because we actually believe that is our deepest free will, and even if we are not choosing to express that, somehow there is a value to helping people come around to expressing that. Again, potentially a controversial kind of stand in our pedagogy of today, but worth considering. So she has some questions for further study, which are also included in the PDF that was sent to you. But I'll pause here for questions, comments, reactions. Again, as we delve into Vayikra, of course, we sort of ask the question, how does this relate to us in our lives today? Is it, do we use the analogy from sacrifice to tefillot, or to other aspects of our relationship with God? So open for thoughts and comments. Dad, go ahead.
Now, it's interesting that she used a youngster as an example. When a husband refuses to give his wife a get, leaving her in the status of an aguna, he also can be coerced into giving her the get. It doesn't always work, but that's another example. And then she quotes the verse, I think, about the get. So surprised she used the youngster as an example.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah.
Maybe aguna was not such an issue when she wrote this.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a good question, because she quotes the Rambam in the context of the laws of divorce and that concept, or that context. But she comes back to this. Maybe maybe it's an example of an area where it's more clear to us, or maybe where it's easier to agree, right? It does feel controversial to say about an adult at a certain, who's of sound body and mind, that it feels a little paternalistic to say, we believe that, yes, they absolutely want to always do the right thing. Maybe they decided that that's not what they value anymore, for one reason or another. With a kid, somehow it feels easier, or more, I don't know if more believable or more relatable to say, yeah, we know our kids always want to do the right thing. And if they seem to be saying they don't, it must be that there's some other counter pressure that we can sort of, if we can draw that back, we get to their good core. But that maybe that's less believable about adults. I don't know.
And a youngster is an example that most people would be dealing with, whereas the aguna is, not that common.
Right. So maybe just choosing a more universally relatable or kind of available example. Great. Lance?
Okay, I didn't raise my hand. What is the objective of a sacrifice?
Yes, indeed. Well, there are different forms of sacrifices, so we might say that different ones have different objectives, and that they shouldn't all be kind of, painted with the same brush. Some are to achieve expiation, some are to express thanksgiving. Those are two major ones. But more broadly, I think one argument is that they're all to come close to God, right? That's the argument, that root kuf resh bet, which means to draw near, that even if they have a different sub purposes, the header for all of them is coming closer to God. What do you think?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that question. For me, it seems that the major objective here is to manipulate God. And that's true of prayers, certainly. We say prayers in order to get people healthy. We say prayers in order to get prosperity. We say prayers in order to protect people. We say prayers in order to get hostages back. We do all sorts of things with the implicit assumption that we have the ability to manipulate God. But what if we don't?
Yeah. Yes. So I think it's interesting because my answer was different than your answer. Mine was to draw near to God as opposed to try to elicit a certain outcome from God. And I think for me, um, I think I've probably said this before, for me theologically, it's hard to invest too much capital in the outcome manipulation dimension of theology just because it seems so often not to be borne out. And at the same time, I feel if I give up on its possibility entirely, then then God becomes so distant that it's hard to invest in that relationship. So my incoherent approach is not to put too much expectation on the outcome, to focus on the, you know, feeling of connection to God that is generated by choosing to express my hopes and desires in the direction of God, to more invest in the notion that what it does is builds up in me the commitment to whatever it is that I'm praying for, but also not to completely dismiss the possibility, not to exclude the possibility that there's some way in which there's a positive effect towards the outcome that I'm hoping for when I pray or when I would offer an offering.
I'd like to just quote from Kohelet.
Good
Okay.
choice.
Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven and you are on earth. So let your words be few.
Mm.
As a dream comes when there are many cares. So the speech of a fool when there are many words. Much dreaming and many words are meaningless. Therefore, stand in awe of God. Now, that seems to me is a totally radically different concept of human orientation to God. And that leads me to two other thoughts about sacrifices. What is the purpose of the Paschal Lamb sacrifice?
In On the first Passover or
Yep.
since?
No, on the first Passover in Egypt.
Yeah, it seemed like it was a idea of identifying ourselves with the Jewish people,
Right.
in order to, pledge our desire to go free, or gain God's protection.
Well, not exactly. Isn't it as a sign for the angel of death to pass over?
Yes, that's what I mean by gain God's protection.
Okay. Um, the other thing, though, which I find most interesting, is that according to Professor Jacob Wright, Shabbat, which we think of as a weekly thing, was actually a monthly celebration of the full moon, not the new moon, the full moon. And it was celebrated, presumably, with a feast. And a feast, presumably, is the slaughter of an animal or even some other kind of presentation of something to eat. And it seems to me, for me, and also I think for Rabbi Sachs, that the essence of, in other words, let's put it this way. You look at Kohelet, Kohelet says, what can you do? Not much. Be ready for what comes. But what Rabbi Sachs says you can do is to have communal feasting. In other words, we get together for a wedding, for Shabbat dinner, for a feast. If you get together with your friends for lunch, that's it, basically. That's all you can do. You know, what else can you do? It's futile to think that you have the power to say to prime minister, say to the Israelis, let's have a new election. Let's get rid of this clown Netanyahu. You know what I mean? We're the United States of America and we're in charge and we know what we're doing. And God help us if the Israelis come in and slaughter 1 million Gazans and so on and so forth. And, you know, isn't that as foolish as trying to make a prayer for hostages?
Mm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have any answers here. I just have
I
questions.
have no answers to that either. Although the passage that you quoted from Kohelet, I think is really interesting. I've never really thought, I don't know whether it's ever been sort of put in conversation with our approach to prayer. I'm just going to share the verse that Lance quoted here in Kohelet chapter 5, verse 1. I don't know whether anyone's ever sort of said, gosh, why do we pray so many words? Kohelet says, don't be so hasty to bring forth speech before God. Is prayer an exclusion? Is it really just telling us the intention we're supposed to have in the context of prayer? So thank you for introducing that verse into the conversation and for all the unanswerable and important comments.
I think the ultimate question is well, two questions. Where was God on October 7th? And where is God now? Where is God in terms of Gaza? What's going on?
Yeah. Other comments, questions?
These are questions that a Christian wrote as a Christian article actually suggests that Jesus says the same thing as Kohelet about praying. And the other thing is she raises a question of the same question. Shuli Boteach raises this question in an essay. Where was God on October 7th? She raised the exact same question. Somebody who is not Jewish. And it just fascinated me because of the connection there. And it seems that, I mean, I've been frankly emotionally upset from, the day one, the first news of what Hamas did. And I can't for the life of me understand how the world can see anything but getting rid of Hamas. And it seems to me that if the world wants to do something, the president of the United States can have a coalition of forces in the Western world go in boots on the ground and help Israel get rid of Hamas while at the same time protecting the people. But they're never going to do that. They're never going to think of doing that. They're never going to think, the West never going to think of putting boots in the ground in Ukraine when, at the beginning of the war, had they put boots in the ground across from the Russians, probably wouldn't have happened. Oh, yes, you could argue there'd be nuclear war, but I kind of doubt that.
Thank you.
Just
one last call for any other comments before we wrap up.
I'd just like to make a point about the prayer.
Thank you, Peter.
I mean, certainly prayer, we pray to Hashem, but we also self-assure our own self with the prayer that there may be help. I have issues with my eyes, and the prayer helps me survive knowing that there may be something good. So it works in both directions, towards Hashem and towards self, which is not to be discarded. Pretty much like a sacrifice. Am I incorrect in that? I mean, there's not much else. As one other point, when I was a little boy, I could ask my parents' help. I don't have that anymore. I have no one else to ask for help. There's only one place.
Yes. Yes, I think that's a very profound God as this sort of, I don't mean this irreverently in any way, like the backstop, in the end, God is behind everyone and everything. And when we may lean in more closely to our closer connections, parents, and others. Certainly the psalmist says it, Ki aviv imi azavuni v'Adonai asfeni. My parents may leave me, but God will gather me in. And and I really resonate with the sort of two dimensions of prayer as of sacrifice that you're speaking about, the impact on the self and the impact on God. Neither of them can really be fully known. It seems to me that if we dismiss either one entirely, we're losing some dimension. I have doubts. I feel fairly confident about the impact on self. I have doubts about the impact on God, but I'm not prepared to let that go. So
yeah, you're absolutely right.
May I have one final thought here?
Sure.
Okay. I've been thinking about this, and actually, I have an alternative to what I said, the criticism of prayer as manipulation. For me, and this is, I've been going to services since I was at least 5 years old, and I love chanting. I love listening to the Chazan. I love listening to even the Shliat Tzibur. And it seems to me that you could suggest listening to the Chazan, listening to, was it Ellie? Ellie, is listening to the voice of God.
A good point.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Beautiful.
I also get moved by a good Chazan. Absolutely. Chazan, it moves me.
Beautiful. All right. Thanks, everyone. Hope as we encounter this, both the term kuf resh bet in its various forms, lakriv, korban, etc., and also this term of ratzon, we're thinking about these different dimensions of meaning that we encountered with through Nechama tonight, and I'm also thinking about the comment of Beno Jacob that she quoted about halfway through about the function of the Mishkan or the Mikdash, that yes, God is everywhere, but there's something to taking something with us and going to a particular place of encounter where the other distractions of everyday life are diminished. It is our goal in some way for Shul to be like that. So keep that in mind and come to Shul whenever you can. But when we can't, and that's true for many of us in different moments in different ways, we also know that God is accessible to us wherever we are. So thanks to all.
It's also the voice of the congregation.
Yes, absolutely.
Same thing.
Absolutely. All right.
Thank you.
Love to mom and dad. Good night to all. See you next
Laila
time.
Tov. Good night.
Can I add something?
Oh, Bracha, please. Was waiting for you.
Um,
Anyone who needs to drop off, of course, may, but I don't want to miss out a chance.
because a couple people have mentioned the congregation. I was fascinated when I was looking at this first section on Sunday by the second pasuk, because it's talking very much about an individual sacrificing, but all the language is plural. So I don't know if you can pull up that pasuk.
Which one?
The second pasuk.
When you say second, do you mean chapter 1, verse 2?
I believe it's chapter 1, verse 2.
Sure, let's go there. Hold on. Get some Hebrew, 1 second. Is this what you're thinking of?
Because it's talking about an individual bringing an offering, but it says mikem, so that's in plural, it's not in singular.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it's describing from where to take the offering, it says min ha-behema, min ha-bakar, min ha-tzon. But in the translation there it is, offering from the herd or from the flock, from the cattle, from the herd or from the flock. So
Yes.
offering from the plural it's not focusing on the individual sheep.
Mhm.
So is bringing us back to the plural, to the intertwining of the individual and community. Like it feels like there's a strong push to understand that you're not just offering something for yourself alone, but you're offering it in the context of community.
Yes. Yeah, that resonates very much. Yeah. Great. That's right. It applies, I guess, to our prayer experiences and others as well, that maybe even when we are by ourselves, we're always somehow in the context of greater community. So a great addition to close out, and wishing everyone a great night and great rest of the week. And a Chag Purim Sameach in advance. Good night all.
No.